right, welcome everyone. This is the fourth episode of the And One podcast. And the And One podcast is focused primarily on getting officials to be better and they can perform better. So I couldn't think of a better person to bring on today than a good friend of mine, Leslie Huntignton. I've met Leslie several years ago. Our point of connection is softball and team building. For our listeners that might not know this, I officiate high school and collegiate women's basketball, but I also run a team building business and facilitate a lot of workshops. And I've had the pleasure of connecting with Leslie with her softball program. And Leslie is going to talk today about mindset and mental toughness as it applies to officials. So Leslie and I, every time we connect, we always have some kind of a conversation about umpires and officials. So I thought this would be a really great way for us to bring in a new look. Normally we're talking with officials about officiating, but today we're going to kind of flip that on its head and we're going to do a mind shift and we're going to talk to a coach about officiating. And obviously Leslie's encounters are usually with umpires, but we're going to apply the activities of mindset and mental toughness to all officials, umpires, basketball officials, football officials, lacrosse officials, etc. So I'm super excited to have Leslie with us, and Leslie Huntignton enters her 21st season this year as the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire's head softball coach. She is the Blugolds all-time winningest coach, and this is pretty impressive. Has earned her 500 career win as of February 20th, 2021. In addition, Leslie was inducted into the National Fast Pitch Coaches Association Hall of Fame in December of 2021. I know how important that was to Leslie because I follow her on Facebook, and I remember her being very proud of that honor. In 2008, Huntignton led the Blugolds to an NCAA Division III national championship, the first in program history. And in 2007, the team finished third in the nation. That's pretty impressive. Between 2004 and 2006, Leslie received 3 WIAC Coach of the Year awards in a row. Each year, the Blugolds won the WIAC title, by the way. The first time in WIAC history, a team has won 3 straight. She was also named the WIAC Coach of the Year in 2012. And prior to her time at UW Eau Claire, Leslie spent 4 years as the top assistant at Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa, where she was a top assistant with the softball team, where they finished third in the nation twice and won a national championship in 1997 and 1999. So, Leslie, we're blessed to have you, and we're going to just get right to business here and start talking about mindset and mental toughness and relate it back to officiating. So, Leslie, as the head coach at UW Eau Claire for softball, what is the mindset you would expect from umpires and maybe the mindset of officials in general?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And you don't a lot of times think of mindset and mental toughness when it comes to officials. And so I thought it was really interesting that you asked me to talk about this kind of stuff, because one thing that I didn't put in my bio is I'm also a mental performance coach, and I've got a business that I do on the side as a mental performance coach, something I'm really, really passionate about and have invested a lot of time into. But when it comes to officials, I think, really the biggest thing is, just like our athletes, we want officials in the moment and working one moment at a time, working one pitch at a time, one play at a time, one possession at a time, and really dialing it in to that moment so that they can be focused and really be on top of their game and be the best they can in that moment. And so, that's one of the first things that really comes to mind when I think about the mindset and mental toughness as it relates to officials.
And that's something, Leslie, that when you're a brand new official, you're building that ability, and you don't have full capacity of that ability. So that's why it's so important for us to have, a process of mentoring people as they're developing their mindset and their philosophies of officiating, because they're so brand new. It's no different than a player who's a freshman coming into your program. Even though they might have been a really good athlete in high school, it's still a totally different mindset when you're trying to perform as a collegiate athlete. So do you think there's some overlap between the journey of being a newer player, transitioning to being a senior, and kind of being a newer official as you're maybe the new kid on the block, and you're trying to, develop your mindset and your philosophy?
Yeah, I think so because, we talk with our players about our new players, especially, um, about they come in and they're drinking out of a fire hose. And they've got to really learn how to handle day to day and moment to moment. Otherwise, they're going to drown. So when you think about a brand new official who's trying to learn how to navigate whatever sport it is, not only the rules and all that that entails, but then also the interactions with coaches. And then, unfortunately, the fans and the parents, right? And so figuring out how to navigate all those things and how to do a good job somewhat under duress and still being able to have a clear head, make good decisions, make very quick decisions, which is required of officials. So, but I think, back to the question, back to the point of being new, yeah, a lot of it is like drinking out of a fire hose.
Oh, you got me. You got me thinking about that now. Like, as you were talking for about the last 2 minutes, I'm still fixated on what. I really don't know what that would be like to try to turn a fire hose on full speed and drink out of it. I think that would be like, you got me really thinking about that. Like, that's so true, because I I can remember being a young official where I had to rely on a mentor. And you think about like being a wrestling official, you might be the only one on the mat, so you might not have the luxury of having, like an umpire. You're never going to have, I shouldn't say never, but you ultimately don't want to have less than two umpires on the field. And there's still some active mentoring that can happen. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap between what goes on with developing young talent and a pipeline with players, and what goes on with what we do in officiating to try to develop the same kind of, pipeline. And that brings us to another topic, which is, we've talked about mindset, but let's talk about mental toughness. We often look at mental toughness as it applies to your athletes, right? Let's talk about how we can attribute mental toughness to officials related to the sports they officiated. Could you speak into that a little bit, Leslie?
Well, I think it's still very similar to the mindset piece of being able to perform in the moment and not getting too far ahead, not dwelling on something that happened previously. I used to, when I was in college, I actually umpired high school softball. And so I feel like I have a unique perspective and a unique, I guess, attitude toward officials and umpires in particular, because I've done it. And I think all coaches should have to officiate, personally, because if you haven't done it, you can't appreciate what it takes to do it. And so, but I think when it comes to mental toughness, it's just like I said before, I mean, you have to be able to basically block out the bleachers, the fans, the parents. You have to block out the coaches that are unhappy with whatever calls you're making. You have to be dialed in on, in the case where there's more than one official, you have to be dialed in with your partner and able to communicate and have those systems of communication that you know, a lot of times to the common fan are so subtle that nobody even realizes that officials are communicating with each other, whether it's some
Yeah.
type of a hand gesture or some type of a signal that, like I said, is so subtle that a lot of people don't even know that there's communication happening between officials. But I think that, you know, that mental toughness piece is being able to stay focused despite all the distractions. And then really, you know, being able to, like, I mean, sometimes you're going to make a mistake as an official. And so is it a situation where you're caught up on that mistake and now that mistake kind of perpetuates itself and you make another mistake because you're still thinking about it? No different than our athletes that are performing physical skills when they perform. If they dwell on a mistake, their likelihood of making another one goes significantly up.
Yeah.
So, and I can recall a high school game that I officiated when I was in college. And the reason I recall this so vividly is because I was actually umpiring a high school game for the coach that was an assistant coach of mine where I went to college. So we had a very good relationship as a coach player relationship. And I got assigned one of her high school games, and I wanted nothing more than to do a great job for her. And that day ended up being by far my worst day as an umpire. And at that point, you know, I'm not into all this mental performance stuff and this mindset stuff and everything. I was like, I don't know, you know, 22, 23 years old. And I just remember being so concerned about doing a great job for her because I wanted to impress her that I mean, I was behind the plate for that game and I was horrible. I was horrible. And I wasn't in the moment. I wasn't focused on the things that I could control and the things that I should have been focused on.
You know, we think about, you take a sport like softball or baseball where you get up to 3 strikes before you're put out, and there's 3 outs in an inning before you stop your half of an inning, and there's mistakes that are automatically built into that, right? Strike one, you're still okay. Strike two, you're still okay. Strike three, you got to go back and you'll get another chance. And I think sometimes in officiating, we don't honor. When I say we, I mean the audience of everyone as a whole. We don't honor that there are mistakes that are going to get made. When you make mistakes as an official, it's almost like you're paying a deadly sin, whereas we automatically know that mistakes happen in sports, right? In football, you get up to 4 plays, you know, to get 10 yards, not one play, not two, you know, 4. So mental toughness has to be discussed in officiating because of the pressure of being as close to perfect as you can. And I've been doing, you know, officiating for 30 plus years. And I have always said every game I'm going to try to be perfect. And guess what, Leslie? It hasn't happened yet. There's no such thing as, you can chase after a perfect game, right? As an official, but there's always going to be that, you know, I have a good friend who's a really good umpire, and he always told me, you know, I've done a good job behind the plate if I can say I missed 5 pitches or less. And I think, you know, of how many pitches there might be in a game, you miss 5, that's pretty good, right? But not as good as we would define a pilot, right? Number of takeoffs has to equal number of landings.
Right. Right.
There's a job where we could maybe talk about, you know, perfection, but in officiating, there's going to be mistakes, and you hit the nail on the head with, you got to live in the moment and you got to move on. And I had a game this year where I was working with a young official, and there was a pretty significant mistake that that had been made. And I put my hands on his shoulders and I looked him right in the eyes and I just said, we got to move on to the next play now. What happened is done. It's in the past. Let's flush it. Let's flush it together. And we made the flush noise. And, he smiled. And then I knew, I'm like, okay, we can move on now. And we did move on, and we had a very good game. And people forgot about that play, just like they'll forget about, the errors that might've been made and the little discrepancies that happen with missing a ground ball or whatever it might be. But, we always talk about officials having a personality, right? You have to be able to crack a joke, use your humor, make conversation, smile, enjoy the moment. So what are some personality traits that when you evaluate and look at officials, you see them coming, right? The guy with the ball bag and the guy with the mask he's showing up to work your game. What leads you to believe when you see these certain personality characteristics that an official is likely to be mentally strong and have a really good mindset?
Well, I think, I think most coaches appreciate relationships with officials that are cordial and respectful and, there are definitely officials that really don't want anything to do with you when it comes to like pregame conversation or, just having a rapport with, like in our situation with softball, having a rapport with your catcher. There's definitely officials that don't want to deal with it. And there's definitely officials that appreciate the relationship between them and a catcher, for example. And the officials that don't want anything to do with it, those are the ones that are tough to deal with because, like at our level at Division III, we're working on, our players are playing for the love of the game. And we want to go out and have some fun while we're competing our tails off. And officials are a part of that. So if an official is going to be all frumpy all game and appear that, my job is to get this game over with because I'm ready to get on the road.
Just be as stoic as possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, we can all tell when there's an official that really is just there to collect the paycheck and wants the game over as quickly as possible and get back in the car and go home. You can tell when that's the case. So the officials that aren't there to just collect the paycheck are the ones that you get a feel for that personality. You have that interaction. You feel good about that official doing your game because they care about the players, they care about the coaches. And I think another thing about that is officials understanding that, to them, to some officials, right? I'll qualify that. To some officials, like I said, it's collecting a paycheck. It's just a game. Like there is no skin in the game for them whatsoever. When the game is over, they're getting in their car, they're driving home. They're not going to lose any sleep over any of it. But to a coach who has an official who has trouble with being in the moment, has trouble with focus, has trouble with, having some rapport and some conversation and communication, coaches lose their jobs over not winning enough. And so I think there has to be a really synergistic relationship between officials and coaches. And, my hope would be that officials understand that it is, for a lot of us coaches, it's more than a game. It's not just about coming out and trying to get the game over with as quickly as we can. It's about doing a quality job, having that rapport, having those relationships, having a personality, being conversational. And I think there's a fine line between being conversational and being almost too conversational. I'm talking about professional conversation, that type of thing. Not too much talk in between innings and those types of things. But I think it is important. The mutual respect is important. And when an umpire understands, again, we're talking umpires because I'm a softball coach, but when an umpire understands that winning and losing is important to me, because ultimately my job could be on the line if I don't win enough, then they're going to work hard to do things right and to get calls right. And likewise, when I know that there's an umpire that understands and respects that, then they're going to get a lot more grace and a lot more respect and a lot more patience out of me as well.
It's interesting. You used a lot of good terminology, Leslie, that made me start to think. I've always, you always make me think, like the fire hose thing. I'm still thinking about the fire hose. I'm going to try and drink out of a fire hose and make it happen.
Oh, geez.
Without drowning. The word synergy, and you just think about officiating. It's not going to be a one and done, right? If you do this for a long period of time, you're going to see a team again. So to have rapport, and I liked how you talked about a professional relationship, because I think that's a fine line. When you're a younger official, you almost think like you have to respond to everything that a coach says, and you're at their beck and call. And at the end of the day, that's a competitive environment. So there has to be professional boundaries. And I like that you mentioned that, because that's so important for us to strive for. Remember the Tom and Jerry show with Spike the dog? Do you remember the Spike the dog, the big dog?
Kinda. Man, it's been a long time since I've watched Tom and Jerry. Holy cow, you're dating me here.
And then there was the little dog, and the little dog wouldn't shut up, right? The little dog was always talking, and Spike would try to get him to find some balance between too much talk and no talk. There had to be an in-between. So that's that professional, conversation. And you're going to see a team again. It's just like gardening. You're not going to just plant a garden, harvest the garden, and not want to plant it again. So you have to learn from your mistakes. So the next time you plant, you say, hey, maybe I'll wait a little bit longer for my tomatoes, or maybe I'll learn to weed more often so that I have a better yield. And in officiating, we have to learn from our mistakes so that when we go back and see coaches again, we have that mutual respect. And that's so important. And I really appreciate you touching on that. This next one is a question that I think is going to be really right in both of our wheelhouses, because we speak E plus R equals O. And our listeners, just hang on for the ride, because Leslie and I will explain this. We're both very familiar with the concept of E plus R equals O. And I'm going to let you explain this equation as if you were a math professor. And we apply it to our day-to-day life, right? This is performance coaching. And if you don't know E plus R equals O, you're not going to perform well. So can you explain this in detail about this concept, and maybe think about applying it to officials? Maybe give some examples about how E plus R equals O. If officials really truly understand how to balance this equation, how are they going to be better, and how are they going to maximize their performance and be more mentally tough? I know that's a lot. That's a lot that I'm cramming in here. So I know by your body language that you're jiving with me.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack. But okay, so the foundation of it, E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. And when we use this in our program, we teach our players that of the letters in that equation, the only one that you can control is the R, your response. So And when you think about it in officiating, it kind of goes back again to maybe making a bad call, making the wrong call, getting something not quite right. And so that kind of is your event. And then your response is, how do I correct it, or how do I make sure I get it right? And that's one of the things that I really do appreciate about most of the umpires that we have. You know, their main objective is, if one of us makes a call and a coach questions, let's get together as an umpire crew and let's make sure we get the call right. And we don't have replay, so we can't rely on that. We have to rely on what the umpire saw. But for the most part, they're going to take the time that it takes to get the call right. So when a coach gets a little bit heated because of a certain call, and again, I think it goes back to officials understanding, you know, the different coaches that they're going to work for, and where are those coaches in their career? What level are they coaching at? Where are they in their career? Are they young? Are they a veteran coach? Are they a coach that's had a lot of success? Are they a coach that's not had a lot of success? And is there potentially some other reason, or some reason that a coach might have maybe a short fuse? It might not be just their personality that causes a coach to have a short fuse. Like, there might be a coach on the hot seat, and that pressure is part of what causes their response to a call. And that's kind of a, you know, another point to this is, you know, it's up to the coach. E plus R equals O is up to the coach. As far as a bad call, I have a choice in how I respond to a bad call. But an umpire also has, or an official also has, a choice of how they respond to a coach that's upset. You know, we've had umpires that, again, respect the fact that it's a very competitive environment and the importance of winning. And so they're very good at trying to diffuse a situation. And then we've had umpires that, as soon as you question them, it's like they, you know, it's like the hair goes up on the back of their neck and they go into defense mode. And instead of working with the coach, basically they're just trying to fight the coach. And to me, you know, the official's first job should be to try and diffuse the situation. And not all situations are going to end up being diffused, because one or the other is going to continue to push it. But that E plus R equals O, event plus response equals outcome, I always get to choose how I respond. And I can choose a positive response, I can choose a negative response, but either response that I choose will ultimately impact the outcome.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when I look at E plus R equals O, I think sometimes people try to be on the other side of the equal sign. They try to manipulate the outcome instead of trying to manipulate the response.
Absolutely.
And then Stephen Covey, you throw him into the equation. For those of you who might not be familiar with Stephen Covey, he was kind of the founding father of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the big kind of concepts there is the 4 paradigms. And if you're looking at your R, you're always seeking a win-win. You're trying to find that win-win. Like, you argue with me because you're upset. And I always tell officials, coaches are mad at the stripes. You know, they're mad at the blue shirt. There's going to be moments where they're going to be upset. And if you think about how you respond versus the outcome, you're striving for a win-win. If you think about the outcome first, that's a lose-lose. if you and I were fighting over a candy bar, Leslie, and I'm tugging and you're tugging and I'm tugging and you're tugging, we might destroy the candy bar completely. And let's say we're standing over a manhole or a drain, and the candy bar comes out of the wrapper and it falls down the drain, right?
Neither of us win.
I don't get candy and neither do you. So why would we want to invest in a lose-lose? That's just obtuse, right? That's insanity. Like Albert Einstein, coins the phrase insanity, repeatedly doing something that gets you the same outcome all the time. And the people who are flirting with insanity are the ones who are on the wrong side of the equal sign. They're living in the outcome world instead of the response world. So this is a great attribute, to bring into officiating. And I think this needs to get discussed, more and more. Maybe we need to get that branded on our referee shirts. E plus R equals O.
Well, I wear a bracelet, I had bracelets made for the team.
I have one.
E plus R equals O. Yep.
Yeah. I think maybe maybe we're onto something for marketing to have this conversation with coaches that, hey coach, how's your R?
Yeah. How's your R?
How's your R? Leslie, we're having some great conversation. This is exciting. As we wrap this up, what advice would you offer to officials to kind of increase their awareness of the demand of mental toughness and mindset? Things aren't going to get any easier, right? We have, fans are fans, right? They're an uncontrollable variable, and they've invested in their special, right? There's an investment, whether that starts in 4th grade or whether it starts, in 8th grade. It doesn't matter. There's some kind of, financial investment. There's a time investment. We can't control those things as officials. All we can do is recruit, retain, and continue to create a pipeline. As we're doing that, what do we need to be doing to get better, and what is going to get us to perform and bring our A game? If you could wave a wand.
Well, I think like so many other things, it really comes down to what your why is. Like, why do people get into officiating? Some people get into officiating because they were an athlete and it's a way that they get to stay connected to their sport. They may get into officiating because it's a great part-time job. Whatever the reason, it's just important to understand what your why is, because there are so many young people, so many athletes that need, officials. I mean, the youth sports scene is insane. So there's not a decreasing need for officials. There's an increasing need for officials.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, we could talk an entire several additional episodes of the podcast about the reasons for official shortages.
We could.
We all know. And I think that it doesn't justify some of the behaviors that we're observing and experiencing in parents and fans, because attacking officials will never be justifiable in my mind. But I think one thing that officials just have to get when they're getting into it, they have to understand exactly what you said, that there is a significant time investment. There's a significant financial investment that these parents are making in their kids, and they expect a return on that investment. Right or wrong, they expect a return on that investment. And in the case of officials, that return is, don't call a foul on my kid, or whatever the case may be, but that call can't go against my kid because of the investment that I'm making in my kid? And how dare you disrupt what I'm investing in? How dare you make my kid look bad in front of that college scout that's in the stands tonight? And so it just gets, unfortunately, it's too personal. And people need to recognize that officials are out there just trying to do a job and just trying to do the best they can. But I think that it's important for officials to understand that, these parents are, you can't, in my opinion, these days, you can't get into officiating if you don't acknowledge that this kind of abuse of officials and the way parents are acting in the stands is real.
It is real.
You have to acknowledge it, and you have to understand that there's a very good possibility at some point that you're going to be confronted with it.
And we talk about, obviously you can't avoid conflict in officiating. However, you can, with a little bit of time and effort and practice to make this a habit, you can learn how to avoid catabolic conflict, which is conflict with anger, and replace it with anabolic conflict, which is more the cognitive, I'm going to pause and I'm going to think before I respond. The anabolic conflict is always conflict where you're looking for resolution. So that's where sometimes a little bit of humor comes in, where, if I'm officiating a youth game, I might go over to the sideline and, hey, parents, how you doing today? Good to see you. Where are you from? Oh, I know somebody from there. And then all of a sudden, that little bit of, it's like watering my garden, right? I'm trying to grow the garden. That goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing
I
those
love
little
that.
things. And especially with, you're not going to do that all the time in a high school game. We don't have time for those. But in the youth games, that investment of me turning around and doing that might be the difference maker of me getting shouted at versus they're still going to challenge me.
Right.
But it might not be as, intense.
Well, and that's just the nature of human beings, right? They're going to react emotionally,
Right.
And I think that's all part of that E plus R equals O for officials is, the recognition, the awareness that if someone confronts an official, then that immediate response is also going to be emotional, but the awareness, because that's what happens first. Every input goes to the emotional part of our brain first. And if we have an awareness of that, we can do exactly what you just said. We can pause.
Yeah,
Pause, take a breath, let that input bypass that emotional part of your brain and get more to the logical decision-making part of your brain. And then you can control your R.
Right. Easier said than done though, right, Leslie?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
If you naturally want to go to catabolic responses, then your brain is going to try to trick you to do that all the time until you tell your brain with a new habit, okay, brain, every time you try to get me to go catabolic, I'm going to pause and then I win. Ha ha.
Right.
But then if you don't do that over time, you're going to go right back to your default. It's kind of like one of those things where unless you do it enough times, it's not going to become a habit.
Right. So, it takes practice. Definitely takes practice.
The cool thing about those bracelets is you can snap yourself.
Yeah.
You can just snap yourself with the bracelet. So, well, Leslie, this was a blast. I think, our podcast show is in its infancy. And so do you know why we call it the And One podcast, Leslie?
And one. And one. Well, I know that's a free throw term in basketball officiating. And
you're
one.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
When a player gets fouled in the act of shooting,
Yep.
So when they've gathered the ball to shoot and they get fouled, they get one shot. It's a one bonus free throw. So oftentimes players will yell and one, and sometimes coaches will do it too. So officials, sometimes we laugh at those things because it's not an and one until we blow our whistle, right? If we don't blow our whistle, there is no and one. It's just kind of like you're in the land of make believe. So we thought a cool name for our podcast would be the And One Podcast because it ties directly back to basketball, and it's a slang term that gets used at just about every single basketball game. So
Yeah.
you've now been subjected to the And One Podcast. You're part of the officiating family now. So we're going to stretch ourselves and maybe do some more podcasts with coaches and mental performance coaches like yourself, and maybe we'll continue to bring in other people that can really get officials to think about, you got to let go of things and you got to flush them so that you can be at your top performance for the next play.
Yep. Without a doubt.
So, all right. Thank you so much, Leslie. And we'll look forward to the next podcast episode. Stay tuned. We have Scotty Doberstein, who has connections to the WIAC as well. Scotty Doberstein is the supervisor of officials for women's college basketball, and Scotty's going to be our next guest. So have a great night, everyone, and good luck in your tournament games and boys and girls state tournament games as well.